So hi everyone. So my name is Michelle and this is Catherine, and we're both Green Schools travel officers. So today we'll be talking about emailing skills and advocacy. So I'll be the person talking about emailing skills and Catherine will talk about advocacy. So I'm going to start by sharing my slides. And if you have any questions as we talk, feel free to type them in the chat. And there'll be some time at the end as well for Q&A if anybody would like to speak up. So just waiting for the slides to come up. All right, can you see that, Catherine?
Yeah, they're all there.
Great, very good. Okay, so I'll be starting with emailing skills. Now, we've all done some emailing, but I suppose depending on who you write to, it might be a little bit different than, say, emailing your friends or your family. So what I'll be talking about is writing professional emails. And so that's basically depending on your recipients. So if you're going to write an email for the upper management of the school, maybe your local authorities, so that's like your county council, other public organizations, some professionals. So for example, these professionals could be people like from shops, in your area, or even volunteers, maybe from tidy towns. People that usually you might not have met before, and also maybe parents. So, and I'm not talking about your own parents, but I'm talking about parents in general. So again, it might be people you haven't met before and you would like to, give a good first impression when you send them an email. So, so why should you write professional emails? So, when you put an email together as part of your Green Schools committee, you'd like to be noticed. Okay, so you have a query, you want to achieve a goal, and obviously when your email comes in somebody's inbox, you would like it to be noticed and to be taken seriously as well. So if it looks professional, it will be taken seriously. And of course, you're going to put a lot of work into it, so you would like it to be respected and not dismissed. And of course, you want to get a reply. And one of the issues when we send emails, especially if we send to a number of people, they might end up in spam. So spam is a folder that a lot of email providers have. So let's say if you sent an email to like a lot of people at the same time, it might not go into people's inbox. It might go in a special folder that's like a trash or a bin, and the person won't even see it. So that's definitely something you want to avoid. And sometimes people who are very, very busy, if they get an email that's not really clear or they're not really sure what it's about, they might even delete it before they actually take the time to read it. So it's really important that, the person knows that, it's aimed at them and what it's about. So finally, you want to get results. So that's the goal of you putting time to spending time on writing an email. Firstly, I'm going to give you some tips. Your own email address, okay? So you want to give the right impression. So you need to stay away from like fun email address, like say chocolatecake@gmail.com, for example. So you might have one like that for yourself, and that's perfectly okay to use it for your friends and your family. But if you're going to write on behalf of the Green Schools Committee, you want to, again, sound professional. So for example, you could create a free one. So I gave you an example on the slide there, St. Mary's greenschools@gmail.com. So that would be using a free email provider. And if your school has a domain name, so for example, like for St. Mary's School, it could be at stmaryschool.school.ie. You could ask the school to create an email address for your Green Schools Committee. So for example, Green Schools Committee at stmarysschools.ie. So that way you have an email account for your Green Schools Committee, and that means that from one year to the next, there will be a record of the emails sent, from like previous years. So you might be on the Green Schools Committee this year and hopefully for a lot longer. But let's say in a few years' time, when you're not on the Green Schools Committee, other students will be able to use that email address and that account And then they will be able to see, oh, look, a few years back, we already emailed that person, or, we contacted them regarding the same thing, or, other issues like that. So the recipient's email address, again, that's another important part of your email. So if you're going to write to an organization, very often they have like a generic email address, like info at, or query at, staff at. That's the beginning of the email address. So try to avoid that if you can. Now, it's not always possible, but if you can, avoid that, because sometimes your email might get lost. The person who might maybe be in charge of the info at email address might receive your email, not really be sure who's going to be looking after it, send it to someone, and that person might not really understand what it's about, and then it's easily happen that the email might get lost. So the best is to find the email address of the person you want to talk to. So I'll put an example here on the slide. So if you wanted to write to somebody in Dublin County Council, you would need to find that person's name. So in the example, John Smith at dublincountycouncil.ie. So you know that the email will arrive in that person's inbox. Now, when you write an email, there's a little box that's you might see it's called CC. That means carbon copy. And that actually allows you to include someone in the email who does not need to reply. So, for example, you might write to someone in the county council about an initiative. So in my example today, I'll be talking about an activity for Bike Week. And you might want the principal to be aware of you sending on that email. So what you do then, you can write the principal's email address in the CC box. So that means the principal knows that they're not expected to reply, but they're aware of the email. And also the person, so the recipient, will know that the principal knows about you contacting them with regard to that initiative. It'll make sense. I'm going to show you an example in a moment. There's also something called a subject line, and it's very easy when you write an email to forget to write something in the subject line, but that's the first thing that the person will see when they see your email in their inbox. So you need to write a brief description of your intention in the subject line. So for example, here I wrote support for Bike Week activity with St. Mary's School. Now, you might keep it shorter as well, like Bike Week activity, St. Mary's School. That's fine too. Just kind of a few words so that the person knows what it's about. You also want to give the good first impression with your greeting. So if you know the person's name, it's preferable that you use their name. So for example, dear Mr. Smith, dear Mrs. Smith. But if you don't know their name, that's okay too, that happens. So then you can write to whom it may concern, and then you start your email. So here's an example. So you have your two areas. So that's where you write the name of the recipient. So like I gave the example earlier, John Smith at dublincountycouncil.ie. And then you have the carbon copy box that I mentioned earlier. And in this instance, I put the principal's name. So principal at stmaryschool.ie. It could be the Green Schools coordinator's address, or somebody like this who would be responsible for part of the activity maybe that you're trying to organize. And then you have the subject line, and that's the example that I gave earlier. So support for Bike Week activity with St. Mary's School. And then you're greeting there, Mr. Smith. So then you have the email content. So sometimes that can take quite a bit of time because you want to make it brief. So you don't want it to be too long, because the person who will read your email they might not have the time to read a really long email, but you need to be very clear as well. So it's not always easy to know exactly how long it should be and how much information you need to supply. And we're all doing our best, and sometimes we put a little bit too much, sometimes a little bit too little, but that's why I'll mention as well proofreading later on. But that's why if you get somebody to read it, somebody who might not be involved in the activity, they might actually be able to tell you, well, you need that kind of information, or I didn't understand why you said this, for example. So you want to check your spelling and grammar. So that's really important that, you make sure that the spelling is correct. There's no grammar mistakes. If you're not sure, again, have somebody proofreading it, or you could use the spell check. But just, it just shows that you spent time, putting together a nice email for the person you're writing to. Also, you don't want to have a big blocky email, so all in one big paragraph, because it's quite hard for the person to extract information from it. So you want your email to be structured in paragraphs. And usually I would say a small introduction that gives the context or your intention, then a main paragraph with some details. And if you want to supply a lot of information, you can always add an attachment. So that's a separate document that is attached to the email that the person may or may not open if they need or don't need to. But like that, you don't need to put all of the information in the email. And then your conclusion, and usually in your conclusion, I would include thanks in advance of possible results, and I would offer to supply more information. So sometimes, we're talking about a cycling activity, for example, the person might ask, what about insurance or something like that. You don't really need to supply the information in the email, but you offer to supply more information if they need it. And then when you finish your email, you want to send your best regards. So very formal would be yours sincerely. And I suppose more and more people would use kind regards or best regards when they finish their email. And your signature, so of course you need to use your name. And then if you have a title in the Green Schools Committee, so you might be chair, you might be secretary, you might be events manager, use your title. And then your contact details. So put as many contact details as possible. So a phone number, an email address, and a website, if your school has a website. So the person can, again, look up the school if they don't know about it, or if they prefer to ring, there's a phone number as well that's available. And I mentioned it earlier, but so proofreading is really important. So you get a friend or a teacher to proofread your message before sending, so that you're sure it's understandable and there are no mistakes. So I'm going to give you an example here. So it's quite small print. So I'm going to split up this email in 3 parts. I'll talk about the introduction, the main part, the conclusion, and then the signature. So here's the email address. So we looked at it earlier. So we have the email address of your recipients, you have your subject line, and you have your introduction. So here it's an example, like I mentioned, an activity for Bike Week. There, Mr. Smith, St. Mary's School is currently taking part in the Green Flag for Travel. This means that our school is actively engaged in promoting sustainable travel and in particular cycling. With this in mind, our Green School Committee is planning to organize a cycling activity for Bike Week on Wednesday, the 1st May 2023. So that gives you a context. So I'm imagining that person is probably working in the sports department of the county council, and that gives them an idea about, where you're coming from. So then you'll have your main paragraph. So that's this paragraph here, the one on top. So you give more details. So again, it's really your call how much detail you need to include. And maybe, in my example, you might think there's a little bit too much information, but it depends on, who you're talking to. They might have been involved in that activity every year, so they know exactly the route you're going to take. They know exactly how many students are traveling. So you may not need to give information about that. Here I just thought I'll give a bit more information because that person may not know anything about my plan. So our plan is to bring up to 50 students on a cycling tour, leave the school at 10 a.m., travel along the coast road, have a picnic on the beach, and come back through the People's Park to be back at school at 3 p.m. And in bracket, I put C map attached. So like that, I've attached a map with more information. They may wish to open it, they may not. That's up to them. The local Gardaí have already agreed to look after road safety on the day. We were wondering if the sports department of Dublin County Council would be able to support us. Any help would be appreciated. For example, supplying helmets, high visibility vests, spot prizes, or funding for lunches, snacks, and drinks. Do you suggest examples of how they could support you? They might offer you something else, and that's perfectly fine. Then you have your conclusion paragraph. We thank you in advance for any help that may be provided. So it may not, but you still thank them. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at stmary's.greenschools@gmail.com, or alternatively, you can ring our school principal, Mrs. Delaney, at 0123456678, and our details are provided below. And I know that the details are in the email already, but if somebody wants to quickly give you a call or send you an email, it's handy to have them at the bottom of the email where it would be easily found. So you have your final regards there, kind regards. I put my name as a signature, and then where you come from. So Green Schools Committee, your position if you have one, you have an address, and then you have a phone number. You might say where they will end up. So here I wrote down school reception. So when they ring, they know that they will end up at school reception and they might need to ask for a certain person. You have an email address and a website here for the school, for example. So that's it for me for email skills. I'm going to let Catherine take over now for the advocacy.
Thanks, Michelle. That was great. Some lovely tips. I'll just share my screen and we can get going. So lovely to see you all today, and thank you for turning up, and I hope you get some good skills up this now. Just to organise my screen. So I'm going to talk about advocacy today. I'm also a travel officer based in County Cork, and I'll share some tips with you today. Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of a slow start on my screen. Here we go. So what is advocacy? Now, the Collins Dictionary gave us a definition of advocate, and an advocate of a particular action or plan is someone who recommends it publicly. So another definition I found was that advocacy is the process or the act of writing or speaking in favour of or supporting a cause. And the word advocacy comes from the Greek word advocare, which means towards a voice. So it's all about giving something a voice. And then finally, advocacy is defined as any action that speaks in favour of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends or pleads on behalf of others. So we're building a picture to understand what an advocate is and what advocacy means. So our next question really is to say, why advocate? So in green schools, certainly, and in like the wider world, advocating is to bring about a change. So there's an issue that we're concerned with, that we feel like needs to be understood, and we need to bring about that change. And it's giving a voice to people who need it, making sure they have the right information. So if we think about green schools work, in that scenario, we're advocating for the environment, possibly advocating for groups that don't have their voice heard. I'm thinking of our Angie Cycles campaign that was based on teenage girls. Advocacy is also about having your voice heard in this public sphere. So it's taking that information and asking to be listened to. And environmental advocacy involves presenting that information on current issues in a way that it inspires people to take action. And it's really important work in terms of our green schools work, as we know that we have a big climate crisis and biodiversity loss. So how do we advocate? So the first job is to gather the information and just have the right facts. So if you're talking on something and speak and you know how to speak about it, if people ask you questions and you're getting the good information across, that could be the only education that people get on the subject. So you really want to know that they've got a good information. And it's always worth thinking about who or what are you advocating for? Are you advocating for yourself, for your mum, for the school, for the planet? You could be advocating for everybody. So each situation will be different, and it's just something to keep in mind so that you know where to aim your information. And then identify representatives. And by that, I mean who you want to hear your information. Now, this could be anything from a teacher to the school, your school board, local representatives or national representatives like TDs, politicians, campaigning against them for the change that you feel needs to be made. Then the next step is to express your concerns to those representatives. So we've learned some great email skills from Michéle, and I think over the week built up a catalogue of skills that you could use for that. Writing your letters and emails. So I don't know if people really write letters so much anymore, but you can write a letter or an email or any way that you think it's a good way to communicate. And then you might choose in your advocacy to create a campaign to inform people. And it's really up to you what that looks like. A campaign can be anything from spoken word to something creative, to creating a website, a social media campaign. So I think it also depends on who you're trying to reach, like whether you direct them or whether you just have a general campaign that is there to direct people towards. And then a really good way to keep your issues alive is to have a space, have an event to explore people's issues and concerns so you can bring them to somewhere and create that education, chat, have tea. Tea and cake goes so far. I'm a big fan. But really, it's all about communication, communicating those issues that you're feeling really passionate about. So advocacy in action, what does it look like? So we've already talked about contacting your local politicians, creating your campaign, and a really good tip is to just work on your strengths and interests, because if you make it difficult for yourself, you don't come across it so clearly. So you might be really good at writing your emails, social campaigns. You might be really artistic. You might need to have something creative that people can look at, and that makes them think about what you're trying, the message that you're trying to bring across. Thinking together, there's always power in the group, and that the Green Schools Committee are very powerful together. So it's great to have group actions if that works for you. But everyday actions, keeping the conversations alive, knowing what you're advocating for, and just being living proof of that. Policy shifts in education influence change. So what I mean by that is the more you're educated and the more you educate other people, that knowledge influences change, and then you can influence the policy shifts if that's a level that you're aiming at, maybe in other environmental spheres that we'll have a look at in a while that could make a difference. And if you're really passionate, choosing your career in an environmental area is a really good act of advocacy. Anything from environmental law to there's everything you can imagine, planning, working in parks and wildlife. There's 101 careers that will support your environmental issues. So in Green Schools, we dialed it down to our Green Schools work. This is the flags that you may be on. So we've got our original themes and the global citizenship themes. And each one's advocating for a different area of environmental work. And within that, campaigns are created on specific subjects. So it's all about just keeping up those themes as well. So you're still in schools, you're just embedding in your biodiversity, travel habits, water, energy, litter and waste. The Anti-Cycles programme is a really good example of a specific campaign on the travel flag, where we noticed that teenage girls just are dropping off in numbers cycling. So forums were held around the country and listened to their voices about why that was and what the issues were. And then a whole campaign's been created over the years. And now there's ambassadors every year to address and hold forums and lots of activities around the Energy Cycles programme. So if you're not involved, that's actually really worth having a look at because it's really interesting. So this is a few pictures that I took a few years ago at the Fridays for Future, the Climate Strikes March. So that's a really empowering for the students way of asking for their voice to be heard. These are a few examples of creative campaigns that are also a really effective way of being heard. You can see there's a French artist, JR, and it's called the Inside Out Project. So he just takes a photo booth around public events and pastes those up on surfaces. But I think it's really effective. So if you just pass them, it really makes you think about what they are and why that's happening. This is a project that I did a few years back about climate change in Cork City. So we, with permission, painted and created a campaign on some boards in the middle of the city. And this is an example of a few large charities in Ireland who work, who advocate for the environment, and you'll come across them and you can research more. Friends of the Earth, the Irish Wildlife Trust and Fair Seas. I know some of them are really interesting and they're a whole collaboration of NGOs. So if you're interested in advocacy and seeing how they work, maybe go and have a look at those. I won't talk through them because I think I'm a bit aware of time this morning. So that's me for today. So great, thank you for listening to me. Does anyone have any questions? Is there any questions in the chat box that we can help you with?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in the chat. There's still time.
There's still we're all good. Okay, so that's great to be able to share that information with you. So hopefully now you'll feel a little bit more empowered with your email skills and understand a little bit about advocacy and the work that you're probably already doing and will continue to do. So best of luck from me, and thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.